Hi everyone, my name's Jenny and I'm here at the museum. Let's explore some watercolor textures. I have got 7 different kinds of textures, some of which maybe they might be familiar to you, but some of them might be brand new. So I love watercolor because there's so many different things that you can do with it. And it's something that, especially for young learners, is familiar, and that familiarity allows kiddos to experiment. They feel confident in their experiments. So with littles especially, I like to take a little bit of masking tape, and I work in trays because watercolor can be a little messy, but only the good kind of mess, right? And I just like take a little bit of tape and tape the edges just on a couple sides. And this allows, especially if you're working on dexterity, to really focus on what you're doing instead of getting frustrated about your paper moving around. And I'm using watercolor paper that I've cut in half. And then what you'll need is a watercolor palette, you know, just simple stuff. And then I'm going to be using saran wrap, wax paper, salt, an oil pastel, masking tape, and lemon juice. So really simple household items that you probably already have at home, or you can just run up the store and get it really easily. So for the first one, this is going to be our messier one, so let's get ready. We're going to start, especially if you're teaching your kiddos, let's start with a technique that we're going to use in each one of these experiments called wet on wet. So wet on wet is exactly what it sounds like. The first thing you do before you add any color is wet down your paper with regular water, just white, just regular clear water. You don't want it to get too wet, so I'm going really fast and just going for it. Spreading my water. I'm not dumping water on my paper. I'm not necessarily soaking my paper, but I'm just getting it started. And that will allow the paint, when we add our paint, it will allow it to move freely over the paper and really give that watercolor effect that is familiar. So with these, I'm going to look at, you could do some color theory. I think for like best results, I like to stick to some like warm colors or cool colors, because then the paints will just like blend really nicely together. But at this point, so now I have this kind of like marbly, greeny, blue, purpley, and I'm gonna take my saran wrap and kind of crunch it up a little bit, not too much, and I'm gonna lay it directly on my page. And you'll notice, and you can ask your kiddos what they notice, it looks like the paint is moving around on my paper. And then here's the hard part, right, is waiting. So I'm gonna leave this here and we're gonna wait until it's fully dry, and then we're gonna have a really cool surprise reveal. So the next one, we are going to do, it's a little similar. I'm gonna re-wet this just so it's nice and wet, but I'm going to use my wax paper. And then I'm gonna fill the whole page with color, and then we're gonna add our wax paper. With these, I'm going to do yellows and oranges and reds. Now with my wax paper, I'm going to cut shapes. You could do triangles, circles, squares, and as you cut them, you just lay them directly on your paper, and it kind of like sticks like a sticker. So I've got some shapes on here, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna let it dry. So I'm gonna set this to the side. And now we are going to get started with the next one. So I'm gonna clean up my station a little bit. It's always good to kind of clean up and tidy as you're working. And for this one, we're going to do salt. We're gonna use our salt and we're gonna use our lemon juice for this one. So I'm gonna take my masking tape and just tab it down, and then I'm gonna do the same thing, and I'm gonna fill one of my sheets with wet on wet, and then fill it with color, and then we're gonna add our salt and lemon juice experiment and see what it looks like. So I like these because they all end up creating these really interesting textures, but they all have different ways that you can guess that they're gonna look at the end. So, okay. So now we're gonna start with the salt. So this is Epsom salt. You can use kosher salt. You can use table salt. You can even use a mixture of all different kinds of salts. The way that the salt, the crystal size of your salt will give you different patterns. So that might be a really cool way to kind of experiment and see if you can tell differences or similarities between different chunks of salt. You can do a lot of salt, you can do a little salt, but I'm kind of a more is more kind of person, so I'm really going for it. Okay. And you can see as I'm looking at it closely, my salt is kind of soaking up some of my watercolor. As I drop it on there, it just looks, I'm not quite sure what it's gonna look like, and that's okay. But I think maybe I'll see a salty pattern or like a crystally pattern in my watercolor. So we'll find out. Okay, so I'm gonna rinse off, move this salt out of the way on my other one. Do my wet on wet. I guess we're doing purple because I did not do a good job of washing my brush. So I'm kind of locked into that color palette, which is one of the downfalls of not washing your brush very well. Because now I have this bluey gray purple water on my thing. So that means, guess what I'm gonna have to do? I'm gonna have to do blue. Okay, so now this one is pretty wet. And because of my choices about not washing out my brush, we are doing purple and blue again. And I've got a pipette or like an eyedropper and a thing of lemon juice. And so lemon juice is like an acid. And so it's very sour. It's on the sour part of your tongue. So we're gonna experiment with dropping, see what happens when we drop the lemon juice on our watercolor. If you had fresh lemon juice, it works super well. This is from a bottle and it works, it still works. You can still tell. It's making this really marbly kind of effect, blending the colors together. It's also, not gonna lie, and this will probably be really fun with your kiddos, making a very farty like smell, very sulfuric. So kind of like eggs. So that's a really fun experiment. So that is like the chemical reaction happening with this acid and this watercolor. It is making a reaction, and boy, can you smell it and see it. I love that. 5 senses. And I mean, it's funny. So it's gonna be fun. All right, so now that these are done, I'm gonna set them to the side and let them dry. Ooh, stinky. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna let all these dry, and then we're going to do a reveal. And we'll see what it looks like. I really love to cut these up and make collages with them. So with younger learners especially, cutting them up and having this really beautiful handmade collage paper it just looks so beautiful. And that way you can have big swaths of paper for them to just explore and go a little nuts, and you still have this really beautiful finished product at the end, which is not always the case. It's not always important, but with something like this, it's just icing on top. All right. Well, I'll see you later. Have a good one.